I'm Samantha, 29, and after driving 12 grueling hours through 2 states to make it to my brother Tyler's engagement dinner, he opened his door with a casual "Oh, we had it yesterday," like I'd just missed a casual coffee date instead of a major family milestone I'd rearranged my entire life to attend. What he didn't know was that his thoughtless dismissal was the final straw in a pattern of family exclusion and disrespect that I'd been documenting for months, and the surprise I was about to deliver would expose exactly why he'd really changed the dinner date without telling me. That casual oops wasn't just inconsiderate, it was the moment I decided to reveal what I'd discovered about his fiancée and the real reason my family had been systematically pushing me out of important events. Before we dive into how I turned my brother's cruel dismissal into the most devastating family revelation he never saw coming, I'm curious. What would make someone drive 12 hours to attend a family event only to be told it already happened? Drop your theories about what could be worth that level of disrespect in the comments below, smash that like button, and subscribe because this story has more shocking twists than a soap opera finale, and trust me, you won't believe what that accidental schedule change was really designed to hide from me. Growing up as the middle child in the Morrison family meant constantly fighting for attention and inclusion in a household where my older brother Tyler was the golden child and my younger sister Emma was the baby who could do no wrong. While Tyler collected achievements and accolades that earned him endless praise from our parents, and Emma charmed everyone with her innocent enthusiasm, I was the responsible, dependable daughter who kept everything running smoothly but rarely received recognition for my contributions. After college, I'd moved 6 states away for a career opportunity in marketing, partly because the job was perfect for my skills and partly because I needed space from family dynamics that left me feeling invisible and undervalued. The distance made visiting challenging, but I'd always made the effort for important family events, birthdays, holidays, graduations, and celebrations that mattered to the people I loved. But over the past 2 years, since Tyler had started dating his fiancée Madison, something had shifted in our family dynamic that made me feel increasingly excluded from events and decisions that should have included me. It started small. Family dinners planned when I couldn't attend due to work obligations, then scheduled without checking my availability. Holiday celebrations moved to dates that conflicted with my travel plans, then confirmed before anyone asked if the timing worked for everyone. The exclusion became more obvious when Tyler and Madison got engaged 8 months ago. The engagement party was scheduled for a weekend when I had a work conference that had been on my calendar for months. When I explained that I couldn't attend and asked if they could consider alternative dates, Madison responded that they'd already booked the venue and sent invitations, so changing the date wasn't possible. Besides, she'd added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "These things are really more for local family and friends anyway. Long-distance relatives can celebrate with us at the wedding." The dismissal was polite but clear. My presence wasn't important enough to consider when making significant family plans. Similar situations had occurred repeatedly over the past several months. Tyler's birthday celebration was moved to a restaurant that required reservations made weeks in advance, but I wasn't told about the change until the day before. Emma's graduation party was planned and executed without anyone mentioning it to me until I saw photos on social media afterward. Each incident was explained away as an oversight, miscommunication, or scheduling necessity that couldn't be avoided. But the pattern was too consistent to be accidental, and it always seemed to involve Madison's preferences taking priority over my inclusion in family activities. The most hurtful part was how my parents had begun accepting these exclusions as normal. Mom would apologize for not keeping me informed about family plans, but she'd also emphasize how difficult it was to coordinate with someone who lived so far away. Dad would express regret that I'd missed another family gathering, but he'd also praise Madison for being such a wonderful organizer who brought the local family together so beautifully. It was becoming clear that Madison saw me as an outsider who complicated family logistics, and that she was successfully convincing everyone else to share that perspective. But I'd also started noticing other things about Madison that concerned me: inconsistencies in her stories about her background, her work, and her relationships with people outside our family. She'd claimed to have a master's degree from a university that had no record of her attendance. She'd described a previous job with a company that had never employed anyone by her name. She'd mentioned family members and childhood friends who never seemed to be available to meet or even speak with our family by phone. Working in marketing had given me skills in research and background verification, and what I'd discovered about Madison when I'd started investigating was far more disturbing than simple exclusion from family events. Madison wasn't who she'd claimed to be, and her systematic efforts to isolate me from family gatherings weren't about logistics or preferences. They were about preventing me from asking questions that would expose the lies she'd built her relationship with Tyler on. The engagement dinner that I'd driven 12 hours to attend was supposed to be my opportunity to spend time with Madison in a family setting where I could observe her behavior and potentially gather more information about her true background and intentions. Instead, it became the moment when her manipulation tactics finally went too far, giving me the opening I needed to expose everything I'd discovered about the woman my brother was planning to marry. The drive from Chicago to my family's hometown in North Carolina should have been one of anticipation and excitement. Tyler had called me personally 3 weeks earlier to invite me to the engagement dinner, emphasizing how much it would mean to him and Madison if I could be there to celebrate this important milestone with them. "Sam, I know we haven't seen much of you lately, and I feel terrible about how you've been left out of some family stuff," he'd said, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine regret. "Madison and I really want you to be part of this celebration. It's going to be at Mom and Dad's house, just intimate family, and we'd love for you to stay the weekend so we can catch up properly." The invitation felt like an olive branch, a recognition that I'd been excluded from too many family events and a genuine effort to include me in something meaningful. I'd immediately requested time off work, arranged for someone to watch my apartment, and started planning the long drive that would get me there in time for what Tyler had described as a Friday evening dinner. The 12-hour drive gave me plenty of time to think about family relationships, the challenges of maintaining connections across long distances, and my hopes for rebuilding closer ties with Tyler now that he was entering this important new phase of his life. I'd stopped at an expensive boutique in Nashville to buy a beautiful engagement gift, a set of crystal champagne flutes engraved with Tyler and Madison's names and engagement date, something special that would commemorate this moment and show how much I wanted to support their relationship. I'd also prepared what I thought would be a heartfelt toast for the dinner, acknowledging how much Tyler meant to me as a brother and expressing my excitement about welcoming Madison into our family permanently. The last few hours of the drive were the most difficult, with construction delays and heavy traffic that had me worried about arriving late for the dinner. I'd called Tyler twice to update him on my progress and estimated arrival time, and both times he'd sounded excited about seeing me and assured me that they could hold dinner if I was running behind schedule. "Don't worry about timing, Sam," he'd said during the second call when I was about an hour away. "We're just doing family dinner, nothing formal. Get here safely and we'll celebrate whenever you arrive." By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:30 p.m. on Friday evening, I was exhausted from the drive but genuinely excited about the celebration ahead. The house looked festive with additional cars in the driveway and warm lights glowing from the windows, suggesting that family members had already gathered for what I expected to be a lovely evening of food, conversation, and shared joy about Tyler's engagement. I grabbed my overnight bag and the carefully wrapped engagement gift, took a deep breath to shake off the fatigue from driving, and walked up to the front door with anticipation that this evening would mark a turning point in my relationship with Tyler and Madison. Tyler opened the door before I could knock, but instead of the warm welcome I'd expected, his face showed surprise and what looked like uncomfortable confusion. "Sam," he said, not moving aside to let me enter, "what are you doing here?" The question was so unexpected that I thought he might be joking. "I'm here for your engagement dinner. The one you invited me to 3 weeks ago. The one I just drove 12 hours to attend." That's when Tyler delivered the words that would change everything about our family relationships and my understanding of how carefully I'd been manipulated for months. "Oh," he said, his voice casual as if he were mentioning that he'd forgotten to pick up milk from the store, "we had it yesterday." The crushing disappointment was immediate and overwhelming. 12 hours of driving, time off work, expensive gifts, careful planning, and genuine excitement about celebrating with family, all wasted because of what Tyler was presenting as a simple scheduling error. But as I stood on that doorstep processing what he'd just said, I realized that this wasn't an accident or miscommunication. This was deliberate exclusion disguised as an oversight, and it was exactly the opening I needed to confront Tyler and our family about everything I'd discovered about Madison and the systematic campaign she'd been conducting to isolate me from family relationships. "Tyler," I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion and disappointment flooding through me, "you personally called me 3 weeks ago to invite me to an engagement dinner happening tonight. I spoke with you twice today about my arrival time. How exactly did this dinner happen yesterday without you mentioning it during our conversations?" The question hung in the air as Tyler's expression shifted from casual confusion to something approaching panic. He clearly hadn't expected me to challenge his explanation or ask for details that would expose the inconsistencies in his story. "We had to change the date because of Madison's work schedule," he said, stepping outside and pulling the door partially closed behind him. "I thought I called you about the change, but maybe I forgot with everything else going on." But I could see inside the house through the gap in the door, and what I saw contradicted his explanation completely. The dining room table was set for dinner, with multiple place settings, candles, and what appeared to be preparation for a celebration. If the engagement dinner had happened yesterday, why was the house arranged for a gathering tonight? "Tyler, if the engagement dinner was yesterday, why does it look like you're expecting guests tonight?" He glanced back at the house, realizing that his story wasn't matching the visible evidence of preparation for an evening event. We're having a small family dinner tonight, but the engagement celebration was yesterday," he said, his explanation becoming more tangled. "Madison wanted to keep tonight just to immediate family." The distinction was revealing. The engagement dinner had supposedly happened yesterday, but tonight was also a family gathering that somehow didn't include me despite my specific invitation to celebrate Tyler's engagement. "Tyler, who was at yesterday's engagement dinner that isn't here tonight?" I asked. "Look, Sam, this is getting complicated," he said, his voice carrying frustration that I wasn't accepting his explanation and leaving. "Maybe you should head to a hotel for tonight and we can all get together tomorrow to catch up." The suggestion that I should leave after driving 12 hours to attend an event I'd been specifically invited to was the final confirmation that this exclusion had been planned and deliberate rather than accidental. That's when I decided to reveal what I'd discovered about Madison and why her campaign to isolate me from family events made perfect sense once you understood who she really was. "Tyler, before I go anywhere, there's something you need to know about Madison that explains exactly why she doesn't want me around your family celebrations." His face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd been collecting documentation about Madison's background, her false claims about education and employment, and the evidence that suggested she wasn't the person she'd presented herself as to our family. I'm talking about the fact that Madison Chen isn't her real name. I'm talking about the fact that she doesn't have a master's degree from Duke University, She never worked for the marketing firm she claimed to work for, and her entire background story is fabricated. Tyler stared at me like I'd just accused him of being in a relationship with an alien. That's ridiculous, Sam. Why would you make up lies about Madison? I'm not making up anything, I replied, showing him documents I'd printed from my research. This is public record information that anyone can verify with basic background checks. Madison has been lying to you and our family about who she is, where she comes from, and what her qualifications are. The front door opened wider, and Madison appeared beside Tyler. She'd obviously been listening to our conversation, and her face showed the kind of calculating expression that confirmed everything I'd discovered about her manipulative nature. Sam, she said, her voice carrying fake warmth that barely concealed underlying hostility, what a surprise to see you. Tyler told me you weren't able to make it to the engagement celebration. The lie was delivered so smoothly that I almost admired her skill at deception. She was continuing the fiction that yesterday's dinner had been the engagement celebration I'd been invited to, while implying that I'd been the one who couldn't attend rather than the one who'd been deliberately excluded. Madison, I was invited to an engagement dinner happening tonight, I said, maintaining eye contact. But since we're all here together, this seems like a perfect opportunity to discuss some inconsistencies I've discovered about your background and why you've been working so hard to keep me away from family events. Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath her sweet facade. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but spreading false information about me isn't going to make Tyler choose you over me in family relationships. The response was telling. She'd immediately framed my investigation as jealousy and competition rather than legitimate concerns about deception, and she'd positioned Tyler as someone who had to choose between his sister and his fiancée rather than someone who deserved to know the truth about the woman he was planning to marry. But I had documentation that would make her denials impossible to maintain, and Tyler's parents were about to learn exactly why their future daughter-in-law had been so eager to exclude me from family gatherings. Madison, I said, pulling out the comprehensive file I'd prepared, let's start with your claims about education. You've told our family that you have a master's degree in marketing from Duke University, graduated summa cum laude in 2019. Tyler looked confused. Sam, what does this have to do with anything? It has to do with the fact that Duke University has no record of anyone named Madison Chen graduating from their program, I continued, showing them printouts from my research. In fact, they have no record of anyone by that name ever being enrolled in their marketing program. Madison's face remained composed, but I could see her calculating her response to being confronted with documented evidence of her lies. There must be some kind of administrative error, she said smoothly. University record keeping isn't always accurate, especially for recent graduates. What about your employment history? I asked, pulling out additional documents. You've told our family that you worked for Henderson Marketing Group in Charlotte for 3 years before starting your current job. I showed them correspondence from Henderson Marketing Group confirming that they'd never employed anyone named Madison Chen and had no record of her ever working for their company. This is where I need to pause and check in with all of you following this family deception and manipulation. Have you ever discovered that someone in your family was living a completely fabricated life? Have you watched a family member get manipulated by someone who turned out to be a professional con artist? Hit that like button if you're ready to see exactly how deep this web of lies goes, and subscribe because what I discovered next about Madison's real identity will blow your mind. Trust me, the engagement dinner exclusion was just the tip of this iceberg of deception. Madison, I continued, would you like to explain why multiple employers you've claimed to work for have never heard of you? Tyler was starting to look genuinely concerned as the scope of Madison's deception became clear. Madison, what's going on? Why can't these companies verify your employment? Tyler, your sister is obviously trying to sabotage our relationship, Madison said, her voice taking on a tone of victimized innocence. She's been jealous of our engagement from the beginning, and now she's making up lies to try to break us up. But I had more than just employment and education records. I had discovered Madison's real identity and her history of targeting men from wealthy families for elaborate relationship fraud schemes. Madison, or should I say Rebecca Martinez, would you like to explain to Tyler about your previous engagements to David Kellerman in Virginia and Michael Thompson in South Carolina? The name change hit her like a physical blow. Her composure cracked completely as she realized that I'd uncovered her real identity and her pattern of targeting successful men from affluent families. Tyler, I said, showing him police reports and court documents I'd obtained through public records searches. The woman you're engaged to is Rebecca Martinez, and she's been arrested twice for relationship fraud and identity theft. She targets men from wealthy families, builds fake relationships using false identities, and then disappears with money, credit cards, and whatever assets she can access. The documentation was comprehensive and undeniable. Rebecca/Madison had been running relationship scams for at least 5 years, moving between states and identities to avoid prosecution and continue targeting new victims. She systematically isolated me from family events because she knew I had the research skills and professional background to discover her real identity, I explained to Tyler, who was staring at the documents in shock. Every time I was excluded from family gatherings, it was because she was afraid I'd ask questions or do background research that would expose her lies. Madison/Rebecca was no longer trying to maintain her innocent act. Her face had hardened into the cold, calculating expression of someone whose criminal scheme had been exposed and who was now focused on damage control and escape planning. Tyler, you need to understand that none of this matters, she said, her voice dropping the sweet tone she'd used throughout their relationship. We love each other, and we're building a future together. Your sister is just trying to destroy our happiness because she can't stand seeing you succeed. But Tyler was reading through police reports that documented Rebecca's pattern of relationship fraud, including detailed descriptions of how she'd manipulated previous victims and stolen significant amounts of money before disappearing to target new victims in different states. Madison, is any of what Sam is showing me true? He asked, his voice shaking as he processed the realization that his entire relationship had been built on lies. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and yes, I've had some legal troubles in the past, she admitted, apparently deciding that partial honesty was her best strategy now that her identity had been exposed. But that was before I met you, Tyler. You changed me. I'm not that person anymore. The confession was exactly what I'd been waiting for, because it confirmed everything I'd documented while also providing Tyler and our family with direct admission that their future daughter-in-law was a convicted criminal who'd been living under a false identity throughout their entire relationship. But I had one more revelation that would complete Tyler's understanding of exactly how thoroughly he'd been manipulated and why Rebecca's deception was far from over. Tyler, I said, pulling out the most damaging evidence I'd collected, Rebecca hasn't just been lying about her past. She's been actively stealing from you and our family throughout your entire relationship. I showed him bank records and credit reports I'd obtained through legitimate research methods that revealed unauthorized credit accounts opened in Tyler's name, small but consistent transfers from his accounts to accounts controlled by Rebecca, and charges on family credit cards that corresponded to purchases Rebecca had made without permission. Over the past 8 months, she's stolen approximately $47,000 from you and our parents through identity theft, credit fraud, and unauthorized access to financial accounts, I explained, showing him the documented evidence of systematic financial theft. Tyler was staring at the financial records in horror as he realized that his romantic relationship had actually been a sophisticated criminal operation designed to steal money while isolating him from family members who might discover the fraud. The engagement itself was part of her exit strategy, I continued. She's been building toward a big financial score, probably accessing wedding funds, joint accounts, or family money for wedding expenses, before disappearing to start the same scheme with a new victim in a different state. Rebecca had stopped trying to maintain any pretense of innocence. She was now focused entirely on minimizing her legal exposure and planning her escape from a situation that had become untenable. "Tyler, I need you to understand that everything I did was because I love you," she said, her voice carrying desperate sincerity that was probably just another manipulation tactic. "Yes, I took some money, and yes, I lied about my background, but my feelings for you are real. You stole $50,000 from me and my family," Tyler shouted, his voice cracking with emotion as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. "It wasn't stealing," Rebecca protested. "We were going to be married. Married couples share finances. I was just accessing money that would have been ours anyway." The rationalization was stunning in its audacity. She'd systematically defrauded Tyler and our family for months, then justified it as legitimate access to marital assets for a marriage that was based entirely on lies and identity fraud. But the most damaging revelation was still to come, because Rebecca's criminal activities hadn't ended with financial theft. "Tyler, there's something else you need to know," I said, showing him the final piece of evidence I'd gathered. "Rebecca has been documenting your family's financial information, property values, and business assets throughout your relationship." The evidence showed that Rebecca had been conducting comprehensive research into our family's wealth, property ownership, and investment portfolios, apparently preparing for a much larger financial crime than simple credit card fraud and account theft. She's been building a profile of your family's assets that could be used for identity theft, mortgage fraud, or investment scams that could steal hundreds of thousands of dollars, I explained. Your engagement wasn't just about access to your personal finances, it was about gaining insider information that could be used to defraud your parents and extended family members. The scope of Rebecca's criminal intentions was staggering. She hadn't just been stealing from Tyler. She'd been preparing to target our entire family for financial crimes that could have destroyed our parents' retirement security and left multiple family members victims of identity theft and fraud. "Rebecca," Tyler said, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal, "how could you do this to people who welcomed you into their family and treated you like a daughter?" "Because that's what I do," she replied, her mask finally slipping completely to reveal the cold sociopath underneath the sweet fiancée persona. "I find successful men from wealthy families, I build relationships that give me access to their resources, and I take what I can before moving on to the next target." The confession was complete and damning. Rebecca had just admitted to Tyler and our family that their entire relationship had been a calculated criminal scheme designed to steal money and assets from people who'd trusted and cared about her. But she'd made one crucial mistake in her criminal planning. She'd underestimated the research skills and determination of a sister who'd been systematically excluded from family events specifically to prevent this discovery. Now Tyler and our family had to decide whether to handle Rebecca's crimes through private family resolution or turn her over to law enforcement for prosecution as the serial relationship fraudster and identity thief she'd revealed herself to be. The silence that followed Rebecca's confession lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Tyler stood holding the evidence of systematic fraud and theft, processing the realization that his entire relationship and planned marriage had been an elaborate criminal scheme designed to steal from him and his family. Our parents had heard the commotion and come outside, arriving just in time to witness Rebecca's admission that she'd been documenting their financial assets for potential future crimes and that her love for Tyler had been entirely fabricated as part of a relationship fraud operation. "Tyler," Mom said, her voice shaking as she processed what she'd overheard, "is this woman saying she stole money from our family?" "She stole $47,000 from me and opened credit accounts in my name," Tyler replied, his voice flat with shock and betrayal. "And she was planning to steal more from all of you using information she gathered while pretending to be part of our family." Dad's response was swift and decisive. "We're calling the police right now. This woman is a criminal who needs to be arrested before she targets another family." But Rebecca wasn't finished trying to manipulate the situation. Even faced with complete exposure of her crimes and the collapse of her criminal scheme, she made one final attempt to avoid legal consequences through emotional manipulation. "Tyler, please," she said, tears streaming down her face in what might have been genuine emotion or just skillful acting. "I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll pay back every penny I took, and we can start over with complete honesty." The audacity of suggesting that systematic identity theft and relationship fraud were mistakes that could be resolved through payment plans and renewed commitment was breathtaking. "Rebecca, you're not my fiancée," Tyler said, pulling the engagement ring off her finger. "You're a criminal who stole my identity, my money, and 8 months of my life. There's nothing to work through because nothing about our relationship was real." While Dad called police and Mom comforted Tyler through the shock of realizing his entire relationship had been a fraud, I found myself reflecting on the pattern of exclusion that had brought me to this moment. Rebecca's systematic efforts to isolate me from family events hadn't just been about preventing me from discovering her crimes, they'd been about eliminating the one family member who had the professional skills and suspicious nature to uncover her identity fraud before she could complete her financial theft. Every missed dinner, every scheduling conflict, every explanation about why my presence wasn't necessary for family celebrations had been calculated moves in a criminal scheme designed to protect Rebecca's ability to operate freely within our family's trust and financial systems. The 12-hour drive that had seemed like such a waste when Tyler told me the engagement dinner had happened yesterday was actually the journey that had saved our family from potentially devastating financial crimes and ongoing victimization by a sophisticated con artist. Police arrived within 20 minutes and arrested Rebecca on charges of identity theft, credit fraud, and organized relationship fraud. The investigation that followed would reveal the full scope of her criminal activities and connect her to similar schemes in multiple states involving dozens of victims. Tyler spent the next several hours providing police with financial records, account information, and evidence of the systematic theft Rebecca had committed throughout their relationship. The process was painful and humiliating for him, but it was also necessary to prevent her from continuing to use his identity for fraudulent activities. The most difficult part for Tyler was accepting that Rebecca had never loved him and that their entire relationship had been performance designed to facilitate financial crimes. Every shared moment, every expression of affection, every plan for their future had been calculated manipulation by someone who viewed him as a source of money rather than a person deserving of genuine care and respect. But Tyler also had to grapple with his role in enabling Rebecca's crimes through his participation in excluding me from family events. While he'd been manipulated by someone with extensive experience in deception, he'd also chosen to prioritize his girlfriend's preferences over his sister's inclusion in family celebrations. "Sam, I owe you an apology," he said as we sat in our parents' living room after police had finished taking statements. "I let Madison, Rebecca, convince me that you were being difficult about family events, and I went along with excluding you because it was easier than dealing with conflict." The apology was important, but it also needed to acknowledge the broader pattern of family dynamics that had made Rebecca's manipulation possible. Tyler, Rebecca was able to isolate me because our family has always had problems with communication and inclusion, I replied. She didn't create the tendency to make plans without consulting everyone, she just exploited it. The conversation that followed was the most honest discussion our family had ever had about favoritism, communication patterns, and the importance of maintaining connections with all family members regardless of geographical distance or scheduling complexity. The aftermath of Rebecca's arrest and prosecution took several months to fully resolve, but it fundamentally changed our family relationships in ways that were ultimately positive despite the trauma and financial losses we'd experienced. Tyler had to rebuild his entire sense of identity and trust after learning that his most significant romantic relationship had been an elaborate fraud. The process was painful and required counseling to address the psychological damage of being systematically manipulated and deceived by someone he'd planned to marry. But Tyler also used the experience to examine his own behavior and choices, particularly his willingness to exclude family members when it seemed convenient or when his romantic partner expressed preferences that prioritized her comfort over family unity. "Sam, I need you to know that I understand how my actions hurt you long before Rebecca's crimes were exposed," he told me during one of many conversations we had while our family worked through the aftermath of her deception. "I chose to prioritize avoiding conflict with her over maintaining a close relationship with you, and that was wrong regardless of her criminal motivations." Our parents also had to confront their own roles in enabling Rebecca's manipulation through their acceptance of family exclusions and their failure to maintain consistent communication with all their children regardless of geographical distance. Mom began making weekly calls to check in with my life and work, not just to update me about local family activities but to genuinely understand my experiences and perspectives as someone who'd built a life outside our hometown. Dad started insisting that major family events be planned with input from all family members, even if that meant longer planning timelines or more complex logistics to accommodate everyone's schedules and travel needs. The financial recovery took longer, but Tyler was able to recover most of the stolen money through insurance claims, bank fraud protections, and restitution ordered as part of Rebecca's criminal prosecution. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for identity theft, credit fraud, and organized relationship fraud involving multiple victims across several states. Most importantly, our family developed new patterns of communication and inclusion that prioritized maintaining connections with all family members over convenience or the preferences of romantic partners who might not have everyone's best interests at heart. The engagement dinner that I'd driven 12 hours to attend never actually happened, but the family gathering that resulted from exposing Rebecca's crimes became the most meaningful family conversation we'd had in years. Tyler eventually started dating again, but with much more careful attention to verifying background information and maintaining family relationships regardless of his romantic partner's preferences. He learned to recognize manipulation tactics and red flags that might indicate deception or criminal intentions. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is refuse to accept exclusion gracefully and insist on maintaining your place in important family relationships, even when that insistence creates conflict or reveals uncomfortable truths. The 12-hour drive that had seemed like such a waste when Tyler casually mentioned that the engagement dinner had happened yesterday turned out to be the journey that saved our family from ongoing financial crimes and protected future victims from Rebecca's sophisticated relationship fraud schemes. Today, 2 years later, our family relationships are stronger and more honest than they've ever been. We've learned to communicate directly about scheduling conflicts rather than accepting exclusions as normal, and we've developed systems for ensuring that geographical distance doesn't translate into emotional distance or reduced importance in family decision-making. Tyler has rebuilt his life around genuine relationships and honest communication, with a much better understanding of the red flags that indicate when someone might be targeting him for financial gain rather than building authentic connection. The most unexpected outcome was discovering that family loyalty sometimes requires confronting uncomfortable truths and refusing to accept convenient explanations that protect harmful people from consequences of their actions. Now I want to ask all of you who followed this journey from family exclusion to criminal exposure and healing, have you ever discovered that someone targeting your family member was also systematically trying to isolate you to prevent you from uncovering their deception? What does it look like to maintain family relationships when someone is actively working to exclude you? How do you handle situations where protecting a family member from manipulation requires you to be the difficult person who asks uncomfortable questions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from others who've had to navigate the complex intersection of family loyalty, professional investigation skills, and the courage required to expose criminals even when they're engaged to people you love. Hit that like button if this story resonated with your own experiences of family manipulation or discovering that someone in your family was being targeted by a con artist, and subscribe for more real-life stories where research skills and persistence lead to justice and genuine family healing. Share this video with anyone who needs to remember that being excluded from family events is sometimes a red flag that someone is trying to prevent you from discovering their crimes, that driving 12 hours for family is always worth it even when the event gets accidentally rescheduled, and that sometimes the best engagement gift you can give someone is exposing the criminal who's been pretending to love them. Thank you for joining me on this journey from exclusion to investigation to justice and family restoration. Remember that your instincts about people matter, that background checks are a reasonable precaution when someone joins your family, and that love without honesty isn't actually love at all. Until next time, may your family celebrations include everyone who matters, may your research skills protect the people you care about, and may any criminals targeting your family underestimate your determination to uncover the truth at their own peril.